The first time I heard that my father had disowned me, it came from my sister. Not from dad, not from a lawyer, not from any official document, from my sister. And according to her, everyone already knew, everyone except me. She told relatives I had broken dad's heart. She told family friends I abandoned him when he needed me most. She told anyone willing to listen that dad wanted nothing to do with me. At first, I laughed because it sounded ridiculous. My father and I weren't perfect. We argued, we disagreed, we spent years seeing the world differently. But disown me? Never. At least that's what I believed. Then the invitations stopped. Family gatherings happened without me. Phone calls went unanswered. Relatives suddenly treated me like a stranger. And little by little, I started wondering if there was something I didn't know, something Dad had never told me. When he passed away 2 years later, I arrived at his funeral feeling completely alone. My sister barely looked at me. My uncle told me I should respect Dad's wishes, and several relatives acted like I had no right to stand beside my own father's casket. I stayed silent, because arguing at a funeral felt wrong. But 3 hours later, everyone gathered inside a lawyer's office. My sister sat confidently at the front of the room, certain she knew exactly what was coming. Then Dad's lawyer opened a file, looked directly at me, and read the first sentence. The color disappeared from my sister's face. My uncle stopped smiling. And suddenly the people who spent years telling my story were forced to hear Dad tell it himself. But to understand why that moment changed everything, you need to understand how my sister convinced an entire family that I had been disowned, because the lie started years before Dad died. My name is Hannah, I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, my sister Olivia controlled every room she entered. She wasn't loud, she wasn't aggressive. She was simply good at making people believe whatever version of events benefited her most. Growing up, Olivia was the favorite. Not officially, not openly, but everyone knew. Teachers loved her, relatives adored her, neighbors praised her, and my parents spent years convincing themselves that every success she had was proof she could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I became the practical daughter, the responsible one, the daughter expected to solve problems quietly. When Olivia made mistakes, people helped her. When I made mistakes, people expected me to fix them myself. At first, I didn't mind. That was simply how our family worked, or at least how I thought families worked. Dad owned a small construction company, nothing enormous, nothing glamorous, but he built it from the ground up, and he was proud of it. As children, Olivia and I spent summers helping around the office, filing papers, organizing supplies, running small errands. Dad always said the company represented more than money. It represented sacrifice, persistence, and integrity. Your name is worth more than your paycheck. That was one of his favorite sayings. As I got older, those lessons stayed with me. Olivia preferred attention. I preferred stability. Olivia enjoyed being admired. I enjoyed building things. When I finished university, I accepted a job nearly 4 hours away. It was a major opportunity, the kind of opportunity I'd spent years working toward. Dad congratulated me immediately. Mom cried. Olivia acted supportive, at least in public. But a week before I moved, she made a comment I'll never forget. "Don't be surprised when everyone forgets about you." I laughed. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "Out of sight, out of mind." At the time, I thought she was joking. Looking back, I think she was making a prediction. And unfortunately, she turned out to be right. The first year after I moved was busy, demanding, exciting. I worked long hours, built a career, made new friends, created a life for myself. But I still called home every week, visited when I could, remembered birthdays, sent gifts, stayed connected. At least I tried to, because something strange started happening. Every time I called, Olivia seemed to have already spoken to everyone. Every family story came through her, every update came through her, every conversation somehow included her version of events. At first, it seemed harmless. Then, small misunderstandings started appearing. A relative accused me of skipping a family event I was never invited to. A cousin claimed I never called Dad anymore. An aunt said she heard I didn't care about family traditions. None of it was true. But the rumors kept spreading, and somehow, every rumor traced back to the same person. Olivia. Whenever I confronted her, she smiled. I must have been misunderstood. It was always the same answer. Always polite, always believable, and always impossible to prove. Meanwhile, Dad remained mostly unaware. He worked long hours, focused on the business, trusted family members to communicate honestly. That trust would eventually become a problem. Because while Dad was building his company, Olivia was quietly building a story where she was the devoted daughter, and I was the one who walked away. A story that grew stronger every year, a story that would eventually convince an entire family that Dad no longer wanted me in his life. And the worst part? By the time I realized how serious the lie had become, almost everyone already believed it. For the next few years, Olivia's version of events spread quietly through the family, not through dramatic arguments, not through public confrontations, through conversations, phone calls, birthday parties, holiday dinners, small moments where people exchanged information and assumed it was true. And because Olivia was always there while I lived 4 hours away, nobody questioned her. Why would they? She attended every family gathering, every barbecue, every birthday, every holiday dinner. Meanwhile, I was building a career, working long hours, trying to create a stable future. Unfortunately, distance has a strange effect on family relationships. The person who shows up often controls the story, and Olivia understood that better than anyone. At first, the comments seemed harmless. Hannah's too busy these days. Then, Hannah doesn't really enjoy family events anymore. Then, Hannah has changed. Every statement sounded small, reasonable, believable. But when repeated often enough, small statements become accepted truths. Before long, relatives weren't asking why I wasn't present. They already believed they knew. And somehow, I was always the problem. The strange thing was that Dad never treated me differently. Every time we spoke, conversations felt normal. We talked about work, life, the construction company, future plans. Sometimes we'd argue. We were both stubborn, but the arguments never lasted long, because underneath everything else, we respected each other. At least that's what I thought. Then Dad's health started declining. It began with exhaustion. Long days became harder. Projects took longer. Appointments became more frequent. At first, nobody seemed worried, including Dad. Just getting older. He laughed. But eventually the doctors discovered a heart condition, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to change his lifestyle. For the first time in my life, Dad started slowing down. And suddenly, Olivia became indispensable. Or at least that's how she presented it. She drove him to appointments, managed schedules, handled paperwork, answered phone calls. Everyone praised her dedication, including me. I genuinely believed she was helping. What I didn't realize was that helping and controlling are not always the same thing. The first warning sign appeared during one of my visits. I called Dad on Friday. We agreed I'd visit Saturday afternoon. Simple, nothing unusual. But when I arrived, Olivia looked shocked, almost nervous. "What are you doing here?" I laughed. I told Dad I'd stop by. For a moment, she said nothing, then forced a smile. "Oh, right." The reaction felt strange. Very strange. Later that day, Dad seemed surprised too, not surprised to see me, surprised that I thought he'd invited me. "Olivia said you were busy this weekend." I stared at him. "What?" Dad frowned. "She told me you canceled." The room went silent, because I hadn't canceled anything, not even close. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Dad shrugged. "Must have been a misunderstanding." Maybe. But something about it didn't feel accidental. Unfortunately, it wasn't the last time. Over the following year, similar situations happened repeatedly. Dad claimed I hadn't called. I had. Dad thought I couldn't attend family events. Nobody had invited me. Dad believed I was too busy to visit. I never said that. Each incident seemed small, yet somehow they always benefited the same person, Olivia. The more confusion existed between Dad and me, the more important she became. The more important she became, the more influence she gained. And the more influence she gained, the easier it became to shape the narrative. Then came the day everything changed. I attended a cousin's wedding, a cousin I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. The reception was beautiful, normal, friendly, until one conversation stopped me cold. An older relative approached me during dinner. She looked surprised. Gosh, Hannah, I smiled politely. It's good to see you. She hesitated. Your father must have forgiven you. My smile disappeared. What? The relative looked confused. Oh. Immediately she realized something was wrong. You don't know? A chill ran through my body. Know what? The woman looked uncomfortable, then quietly said, I heard your father cut you off. The room seemed to spin. For several seconds I couldn't speak, because the statement was so absurd, so unbelievable, so completely false. Yet she said it with absolute confidence, as though everyone already knew, as though it had been common knowledge for years. I spent the rest of the evening asking careful questions. And what I discovered terrified me. Multiple relatives believed the same story. Some thought Dad had disowned me. Others believed we'd had a massive argument. A few thought we hadn't spoken in years. None of it was true. Not a single part. Yet somehow the rumors had spread throughout the entire family, and every path led back to Olivia. That night I drove home furious. Not at the relatives, at the lie. A lie that had somehow become family history. The next morning I called Olivia directly. For the first time in years, I wasn't interested in being polite, and the conversation that followed would finally reveal how far she was willing to go. The next morning I called Olivia, not because I wanted another argument, not because I wanted an apology, because I wanted answers. The call lasted less than 10 minutes, but it changed everything. Olivia answered on the third ring. Hey. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. I didn't waste time. Why are people saying Dad disowned me? Silence. A long silence. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. I have no idea what you're talking about. I gripped the phone tighter. Don't do that. Another pause. Then she sighed dramatically. Hannah, maybe people are just making assumptions. The answer irritated me immediately. Because it wasn't an answer. It was an escape route. I kept pushing. Multiple relatives think Dad cut me out of his life. Who told them that? Olivia hesitated, only for a second. But it was enough. Then she said something I'll never forget. If people believe it, maybe there's a reason. I froze. What does that mean? She laughed softly. It means you've been gone for years. I moved for work. You left. They're not the same thing. The conversation was going nowhere. Every question became another accusation. Every concern became proof that I was the problem. And eventually I realized something important. Olivia wasn't denying the rumors. She was defending them. The moment I understood that, I ended the call. Because there was no point continuing, not with someone who benefited from the lie. Over the next several months, Dad's condition worsened. The heart problems became more serious. Hospital visits increased. Work became impossible. Eventually, he stepped back from daily operations at the construction company. For the first time in his life, Dad wasn't in control. And that frightened him. It frightened all of us. But it also created an opportunity. An opportunity Olivia seemed eager to use, because suddenly she controlled everything. Appointments, visitors, schedules, phone calls. At first, nobody questioned it, including me. After all, she lived nearby. She was available. She was helping. Or so it appeared. Then strange things started happening. I would leave Dad a voicemail. He never mentioned it. I would send texts. No response. I would ask about messages. Dad would seem confused. What message? The pattern repeated over and over, until one afternoon when everything finally made sense. I visited unexpectedly. No warning. No phone call. I simply got in my car and drove. When I arrived, Olivia's vehicle was already there. I knocked. Nobody answered. But I could hear voices inside. Dad's voice. Olivia's voice. Then suddenly silence. A few seconds later, the door opened. Olivia looked startled. Very startled. As though she hadn't expected me. As though she didn't want me there. Dad appeared behind her and immediately smiled. Hannah. He genuinely looked happy. Happy. Not angry. Not disappointed. not distant, happy. That single expression destroyed years of rumors, because disowned fathers don't react like that. Dad hugged me, then said something that stopped me cold. "I've been trying to reach you." For a moment, I thought I'd heard him wrong. "What?" Dad frowned. "I left several messages." My stomach dropped, because I never received them. Not one. The room suddenly felt smaller, much smaller. Dad looked confused. "You didn't get them?" I slowly shook my head. "No." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Dad looked toward Olivia, just briefly. But I noticed. And so did she. The atmosphere changed immediately. Not dramatically, subtly. The way a room changes before a storm arrives. Later that evening, after Olivia left, Dad and I talked privately. Really talked. For the first time in months. Maybe years. And what he told me shocked me. He believed I had been ignoring him, missing calls, declining invitations, avoiding visits. Everything Olivia had been telling relatives. Everything. Somehow those same stories had reached him too. Not directly, not obviously, just enough. A comment here, an assumption there, a misunderstanding repeated often enough to sound true. And slowly, the distance between us grew. Not because either of us wanted it, because someone was standing in the middle, translating, filtering, interpreting, controlling the narrative. For the first time, Dad seemed to realize it too. He sat quietly for a long time, then finally spoke. "I should have paid closer attention." His voice sounded tired, regretful. And honestly, hearing that hurt more than the rumors ever had. Because neither of us could get those years back. The lost visits, the missed conversations, the misunderstandings. Someone had stolen them. And we both knew who. Unfortunately, things were about to get worse. Much worse. Because while Olivia's story was starting to fall apart with Dad, she was working even harder everywhere else. The rumor that I'd been disowned spread faster than ever. Relatives repeated it as fact. Family friends treated it as common knowledge. Some people even claimed Dad had removed me from his will, despite having absolutely no proof. The lie had become bigger than the person who started it, and that made it dangerous. Because once enough people believe something, truth becomes harder to hear. Then, 6 months later, Dad made a decision that nobody except his lawyer knew about. A decision that would eventually destroy Olivia's entire story. A decision he documented carefully, legally, privately. And when that document was finally revealed after his death, the same relatives who believed I had been disowned would be forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. They hadn't been hearing Dad's voice all those years. They had been hearing Olivia's. And the difference was about to change everything. Over the following months, Dad started noticing things he had ignored for years. Small things at first, then larger ones, then things that were impossible to explain away, messages that never reached me, invitations I supposedly declined, conversations I supposedly had that never happened. The more Dad looked, the more inconsistencies he found. And the more inconsistencies he found, the quieter he became. Not angry, not dramatic, disappointed. Because the problem wasn't simply that someone had lied. The problem was that the lie had damaged years of our relationship. Time neither of us could recover. One evening, while sitting on the back porch, Dad surprised me. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him. "What for?" He stared toward the sunset. "For believing things without checking." The words hit harder than I expected, because they were honest, painfully honest. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Dad smiled. "You know what's funny?" "What?" He laughed softly. "Your sister keeps telling people she knows exactly what I want." I smiled. "And does she?" Dad's expression changed immediately. "No." The answer came so fast it almost startled me. Then he added something that would become very important later. "Not even close." At the time, I didn't realize how significant those words were. But someone else did. Dad's lawyer. Because while Olivia continued managing appearances, Dad quietly started organizing reality. Legal documents, business records, personal instructions, everything. And unlike family gossip, legal paperwork couldn't be manipulated by rumors. A few weeks later, Dad requested a private meeting with attorney Richard Bennett. Nobody knew about it. Not Olivia, not Mom, not even me. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. 3 hours that would eventually change everything. Because during that meeting, Dad reviewed every major document connected to his estate, every asset, every account, every instruction, and most importantly, every final message he wanted delivered after his death. The lawyer documented everything carefully. Witnesses signed, records were filed, copies were secured. Dad wanted absolute clarity, no confusion, no interpretation, no opportunity for manipulation. Unfortunately, his health continued declining. Over the next year, the hospital visits became more frequent, the treatments became harder, and eventually everyone understood what was coming, including Dad. The final conversation I had with him happened on a Tuesday evening. The hospital room was quiet. Machines hummed softly. Rain tapped against the window. Dad looked exhausted, but peaceful. For nearly an hour, we talked about everything. My childhood, his business, mistakes, regrets, good memories. Then he reached for my hand and said something I still remember word for word. Don't spend your life defending yourself against stories other people created. I swallowed hard. Dad, he shook his head gently. Listen. So I listened. The truth doesn't need constant protection. His voice was weak. But lies do. At the time, I didn't fully understand. Months later, I would. Completely. Dad passed away 6 days later. The phone call arrived before sunrise, and somehow, despite expecting it, I wasn't prepared. Nothing prepares you for losing a parent. Nothing. The funeral was scheduled for the following week. And from the moment I arrived, I knew something was wrong. People looked at me differently. Some avoided eye contact. Others barely acknowledged me. Several relatives seemed surprised I had shown up at all, as though they expected me to stay away, as though I didn't belong there. Then the comments started. An aunt approached me near the entrance. She smiled awkwardly. I wasn't sure you'd come. I frowned. Why wouldn't I? She immediately looked uncomfortable. No reason. But we both knew there was a reason. The rumor. The same rumor that had been spreading for years. The rumor Olivia never corrected. The rumor many people now believed. Then Uncle Mark approached. Unlike the others, he wasn't subtle. He looked directly at me. Then said, I hope you're respecting your father's wishes. I stared at him. What does that mean? He shrugged. You know exactly what I mean. No, I didn't. But Olivia did. Because across the room she was watching everything. And for some reason, she looked incredibly confident, almost excited. The confidence bothered me, because grief wasn't supposed to look like that. Then the funeral service began. People shared stories, memories, tributes. Some were beautiful, some felt rehearsed. And when Olivia stepped to the microphone, the room immediately paid attention. She spoke about sacrifice, about devotion, about being there for Dad during his hardest years. Technically, much of it was true, but the way she told the story created a different impression. A story with one hero and one absent daughter, me. Several relatives nodded as she spoke. Others glanced in my direction. And suddenly I understood. Olivia wasn't just attending the funeral. She was finishing the narrative. The same narrative she'd spent years building. The devoted daughter, the abandoned father, the disowned child. And judging by the reactions around me, most people believed it. When the service ended, Olivia looked satisfied, as though everything had gone exactly according to plan, as though she had already won. 3 hours later, the family gathered inside attorney Richard Bennett's office. The atmosphere was completely different, less emotional, more expectant. Olivia sat at the head of the conference table, confident, relaxed, certain. Several relatives sat beside her. My uncle smiled. My aunt whispered something that made Olivia laugh. They looked like people waiting for confirmation, waiting to hear what they already believed. Then Attorney Bennett entered carrying a large black file. The room immediately became silent. Olivia straightened in her chair. My uncle folded his arms confidently, and the lawyer placed the file on the table, then said 6 words that instantly changed the atmosphere. Your father left detailed instructions. Olivia smiled. Because she thought she already knew them. She was wrong. And within the next few minutes, Dad's actual voice would finally be heard. Not Olivia's version, not family rumors, not assumptions, the truth. And the first document Attorney Bennett opened was about to destroy a lie that had survived for years. The conference room was completely silent. Every relative sat waiting for confirmation, waiting for validation, waiting to hear that the story they'd believed for years was true. Olivia looked relaxed, confident, almost victorious. Because in her mind, this meeting was simply a formality. Dad was gone. The narrative was already established, and most of the family believed it. Attorney Bennett opened the black file, then removed the first document. I've been instructed to read several statements exactly as written. The room remained quiet. Olivia smiled. She clearly expected praise, recognition, confirmation. Instead, the lawyer read the first sentence. To my family. The room instantly became still. If you are hearing this, it means I am no longer here to speak for myself. I felt a lump form in my throat, because suddenly it felt like Dad was sitting in the room, watching, listening. Attorney Bennett continued. Before discussing my estate, there is one matter I need to address. Olivia's smile faded slightly. For years, rumors have circulated regarding my relationship with Hannah. The room froze. Completely froze. Every eye turned toward me, then toward Olivia, then back to the lawyer. Attorney Bennett continued reading. I want to make this absolutely clear. I never disowned my daughter. Silence. Absolute silence. The words seemed to suck the air from the room. Several relatives looked stunned. My uncle blinked repeatedly. My aunt stared at the table. And Olivia looked like she'd stopped breathing. The lawyer continued. Not once. Not ever. Not privately. Not publicly. Not legally. Not emotionally. A cousin actually gasped. Because Dad wasn't being vague. He was destroying the rumor completely, one sentence at a time. Attorney Bennett turned the page. Any person claiming otherwise is either mistaken or dishonest. The room erupted into whispers. Immediately, people began exchanging looks, confused looks, embarrassed looks, because many of them suddenly realized something. They hadn't heard that story from Dad. They'd heard it from someone else, someone sitting in the room. Olivia's face turned pale. The lawyer continued. Hannah and I experienced disagreements over the years, like many parents and adult children. But disagreements are not abandonment. And distance is not rejection. Several relatives lowered their eyes, because for years they had treated those things as identical. Attorney Bennett paused briefly, then read the next section. The greatest regret of my later years is allowing misunderstandings to grow when I should have confronted them immediately. My throat tightened, because I knew Dad meant it. Every word. The lawyer continued. Some opportunities cannot be recovered. Some conversations happen too late, but truth should never arrive too late. The room became quiet again. A heavy silence, the kind that appears when people realize they were wrong. Then Attorney Bennett reached into the file and removed another document, a signed statement, witnessed, dated, notarized, official, very official. The lawyer placed it on the table. This document was created 11 months before your father's death. Olivia immediately sat forward. 11 months. Something about that date clearly worried her. Attorney Bennett continued. Your father requested this document be preserved alongside his estate instructions. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, then read. I am aware that certain individuals have represented themselves as speaking on my behalf. The room became tense, very tense. In many cases, they were mistaken. In others, they knowingly misrepresented my views. Several relatives exchanged nervous glances. Olivia looked absolutely terrified now, because she knew exactly where this was heading. And for the first time all afternoon, she couldn't stop it. The lawyer continued. If there is any uncertainty regarding my wishes, this document shall override all verbal claims made by others. The statement landed like a hammer. Because suddenly, years of gossip became worthless. Only documented truth mattered, and Dad had documented everything. Attorney Bennett opened another folder, then another, and another. Inside were emails, letters, recorded instructions, business directives, years of evidence, evidence proving that Dad had maintained contact with me, evidence proving he continued supporting me, evidence proving he never intended to remove me from his life or his estate. The lie wasn't weakening anymore, it was collapsing, publicly, completely. Then came the moment nobody expected. Attorney Bennett reached for a small flash drive. The room immediately became silent. Olivia's eyes widened. What is that? The lawyer answered calmly. A recorded message from your father. My heart nearly stopped. A recording. Dad's actual voice. Not a letter, not a statement. His voice. The lawyer connected the device, pressed play. Static filled the room briefly. Then Dad spoke. Hello, everyone. Several relatives immediately started crying, including me, because hearing his voice again felt impossible. Then Dad continued. And within the first minute, Olivia's entire story began falling apart. The conference room was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Dad's voice filled the speakers. Hello, everyone. The sound hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, it felt like he was sitting at the table, like he had simply stepped out of the room and would return any second. Several relatives wiped away tears. Even Olivia looked emotional. Then Dad continued. If you're hearing this, it means I wasn't able to say these things myself. The room remained completely silent. I've spent my life believing that honesty matters. Not convenient honesty. Real honesty. The kind that remains true even when it's uncomfortable. Several relatives lowered their eyes, because they already sensed where this was heading. Then Dad said the sentence that changed everything. Hannah was never disowned. A few people actually looked embarrassed, because they had repeated the rumor for years, without questioning it, without verifying it, without ever asking me. Dad continued. In fact, Hannah has always been one of the people I'm most proud of. My eyes filled with tears, not because of the inheritance, not because of the meeting, because it was the first time I had heard those words, and now he wasn't here to hear my response. The lawyer let the recording continue. Hannah chose her own path. That path took her away from home. But distance never changed how I felt about her. Several relatives looked toward me, for the first time not with suspicion, with regret. Then Dad's tone changed, slightly firmer. There are people who have spoken for me. There are people who claim to know my wishes. There are people who presented their opinions as my opinions. The room grew tense, very tense, because everyone knew exactly who he meant. I want to make something perfectly clear. No one speaks for me except me. Olivia slowly lowered her eyes. And for the first time in years, she had nowhere to hide. No explanation, no excuse, no version of the story she could control. Only the truth. Then Dad said something nobody expected. Olivia, if you're hearing this, I still love you. Her head snapped up. The room froze. But loving someone doesn't mean ignoring their mistakes. The words landed like a hammer. You spent too much time trying to manage how people saw you, and not enough time thinking about how your actions affected others. Olivia's face collapsed. Not from anger, from realization. Because for the first time, she wasn't hearing criticism from a sibling. She was hearing it from Dad, and she couldn't dismiss it. The recording continued. Families don't fall apart because of disagreement. They fall apart because people stop telling the truth. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Because everyone knew he was right. Then came the final section. The section everyone had been waiting for. The inheritance. Attorney Bennett opened the final folder and began reading. According to Robert Miller's final estate instructions, the room became completely silent again. Ownership of the construction company shall transfer to Hannah Miller. Silence. Absolute silence. The company, Dad's company, the business he spent 40 years building, the business everyone assumed would go to Olivia, was mine. Olivia looked stunned. My uncle looked speechless. Several relatives stared at the lawyer in disbelief. Attorney Bennett continued. The transfer reflects Robert Miller's assessment of leadership, integrity, and long-term commitment. The room remained frozen. Because this wasn't just money, this was trust. Dad's final vote of confidence, and he had given it to me. Then the lawyer continued. The remaining assets shall be divided according to the attached instructions. Several relatives received modest inheritances, charitable donations were included, scholarship funds were established. Exactly the kind of thing Dad would have done. But the biggest surprise wasn't the money. It was the explanation attached to it. Dad had written one final note. Attorney Bennett read it aloud. Success isn't determined by who stays closest. It's determined by who remains honest. I have confidence in Hannah because she never asked for special treatment. She only asked for the truth. By this point, many relatives were crying, including me, because after years of defending myself against rumors, I no longer had to. Dad had done it for me. The meeting ended quietly. No arguments, no dramatic shouting, no legal challenges, just silence. The silence that follows when truth finally arrives. As relatives slowly left the conference room, several approached me. Some apologized. Others admitted they should have questioned the rumors. A few simply said they were sorry, and for the first time in years, I believed they meant it. Then Olivia approached. The room was nearly empty, just the two of us and the lawyer. For several seconds, she said nothing, then finally spoke. I didn't think it would go this far. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at her, and for the first time, I believed her. Because lies rarely start with a plan. Most start with selfishness, then grow, then spread, until eventually they become bigger than the person who created them. Olivia wiped away tears. I never meant to lose him. Neither of us spoke for a moment, because there was nothing left to argue about. Dad had already said everything that mattered. Months later, I moved into Dad's office at the company, the same office where he spent decades building a life. On the first day, I found a framed note inside his desk drawer, a note written in his handwriting. Just one sentence. Never waste your life proving lies wrong. Spend it living the truth instead. I framed it on the wall, and every day since then, I've tried to follow it. Because Dad was right. You can't control what people say. You can't control rumors. You can't control stories others invent, but you can control your actions. And eventually, actions become stronger than gossip, stronger than assumptions, stronger than lies. Dad understood that, and in the end, he made sure everyone else understood it too.